Welcome to Journey of the Soul, Lesson 4, our fourth week of exploring afterlife and the rest in peace. And tonight's lesson is titled Where We Go. And tonight we're going to be talking about heaven and hell. So in your student textbooks, we're on page 127. And a lot of you have been looking forward to this lesson. You want to know what the Jewish view on these topics are. And I will say that I'm excited about today's lesson because I think these particularly are concepts that a lot of people, especially Americans, have a very non-Jewish perspective on, and they're not really necessarily sure what the Jewish perspective on it is. A lot of us have, we throw around words like eternal damnation, and a lot of those things actually come from Christianity. And that happens because we live in America, and most of America is Christian. We're going to dive into the Jewish view on these things. And we're going to start, which is always very exciting, we're going to start right away with a video. And I love this. This is going to set the tone for the evening. And I really think you'll enjoy this video. It's really mind-bending. If you pay attention, by the way, to the closely worded language, they really did a phenomenal job there.
Birth and death are as contradictory as night and light. But they are strangely associated with an identical Hebrew word, kever. Kever means a tomb where a body is buried. But kever also means a womb where life is formed. A womb is a gateway to life, while a tomb is a gateway to afterlife. But is there an afterlife? Or does laying a body to rest in a grave mark the absolute end? If it were within our power to interview a soul, we would undoubtedly glean insight into afterlife. Instead, we have chosen to eavesdrop on a set of twins in their mother's womb to shed some light on the before life.
Hey, twin, I'm scared of birth.
Why?
It's the end of existence. We get ejected. We're finished.
I'm also anxious, twin, but I'm not scared. Birth is supposed to be a transition to the real life.
Huh. Don't give me the hiccups with your after-birth, real-life fantasies. How can life be supported without an umbilical cord and amniotic fluid?
Well, maybe it's a radically different form of life. Maybe we won't need the cord.
I wish you were right. I keep kicking that thing away from my neck.
Stop spinning for a minute and imagine, twin. After birth, we will enter a ginormous universe filled with light and with air that we will breathe through our mouths.
Come on, grow some brain cells, will you? Mouths are not for breathing. Besides, if your postnatal paradise existed, why has no one ever returned from that realm? Forget it. Once we leave here, we collapse into cold, dry nothingness and wither into eternal gloom.
I don't think Mother would allow that to happen. She nurtures us in this cozy womb. She sends us nutrients for months on end. For what purpose? Just to end it all with birth? No. Mother has greater plans for us than that.
Now you're beginning to sound infantile. Do you see a mother lurking in some corner of the womb? Not a trace. Show me a mother. And as for your nutrients, can't you feel that annoying cord? Don't exchange empirical for fantastical.
Thankfully, these two delightful infants made it safely to the other side. They grew up in the universe that one had described and the other had denied. And until today, they continue their clamorous debate. It is only that the topic of contention has slightly shifted from is there life after the womb to is there life after the tomb?
I think that the purpose of this parable is very, very clear. The message here is as follows. There is an afterlife. And the afterlife, just as when we're in the womb, there's an afterlife that we are born, and there's this whole physical life that we live, which includes the spiritual life, the body and the soul, etc. After we pass away, there is once again an afterlife. However, I think the other message that this parable is driving home is that the reason we find it so difficult, the reason why the cynical twin has such an easy time convincing his brother, or not convincing his brother, but bringing proof for his brother, or refuting the proof that his brother brings, is because nobody has ever actually come back from there. Today, we're going to discuss the afterlife, and we're going to give you, and I know that this question will come up again, how do we know? How do we know? We're going to give you the Torah's perspective, the Torah's view. And that will come directly from verses in the Torah, the oral Torah, our traditions, as it's been passed down since Sinai. But before we do so, because I always love that you guys should have like a proper understanding as to where we were and where we arrived by the end of the lesson, what we've gained by the end of the lesson, I'd love to call your attention to page 128, where there's an exercise. And let's start with exercise 4.1, which is, what do you think you know about the Jewish view on afterlife? And what would you like to know about the Jewish view on afterlife? I'd love to have some answers if anybody feels comfortable sharing. Ron, as one of the wizened elders, come, let's hear. What do you know about the Jewish view on the afterlife?
When you die, your soul returns to Hashem, but you have to go through a phase where you get all the schmutz removed, and then from there you go to Gan Eden.
I knew I shouldn't have asked somebody so long. All right. Okay. Right track. Good stuff. Good stuff. And what would you like to know about the Jewish view on afterlife?
Who, me?
Yeah. Or you think you know it all?
Oh, no, I don't. I'm interested in to see what, I mean, I've been reading about it, but I haven't really found an explanation of exactly what the Jewish view of the afterlife is. I've read several Jewish views, and they're not the same.
Oh, so you're saying you're hearing one-liners here and there, and you're hearing opinions, but you feel like you want a proper nosedive.
Right.
Okay, well, you're about to do it. Yehuda, what do you think? What have you heard about the afterlife?
I don't know. That's what I'm here to find out.
You guys can't all give the same answer. That's what we're here to find out. All right. Okay, fair enough.
Aren't we going to hover around our body for 3 days and then we go to again?
That's a good one. Okay, that's a good question. Especially, I love that question, especially because it's based on an earlier lesson, right?
Right.
You're asking based on the fact that the nefesh hovers above the grave. So unfortunately, we're not going to give you the answer to that question. The answer is yes. Nefesh does hover for a little bit. But that's not the primary of our discussion today. Today, we primarily want to discuss what happens after that. In other words, with the rest of the soul and the experiences that it's experiencing in the afterlife.
You mean Gehenna, right? Going there and...
We're going to talk about Gan Eden and Gehenna, exactly.
Okay.
All right. So let's try exercise 4.2. Here, it's just type it in the chat, okay? What word? This is a word association game. I say the word hell, first word that comes to mind. Type it in the chat. Shouldn't take so long. Type it in. What you got? I see the word hell.
Test disable.
I'm sorry. I'll fix that. The first reaction that comes to your mind is?
With it.
Hot.
Put it in the chat. Put it in the chat. Hot is a good one. I like it.
It's still disabled.
I know. I'm working on that. Sorry about that. There we go. Okay. Should be allowed now. Limbo. Okay. Punishment. Darkness. All right. What else we got? Freeway. I'm assuming you mean the traffic on the freeway. Very good. Eternal darkness. A place to party? Okay. Fire. Okay. Somebody else said hot. So hot, fire, suffering. Christian. Okay. That's actually that's not a proper answer. It's actually not Christian. There is a Jewish view on hell. We're going to talk about it. It's very different than the Christian.
Not hell.
Right. I mean, it's so different.
It's so different. Okay. All right. But I see where you're going with that. Anybody else? Okay. we're going to keep those. And a lot of them, by the way, find sources in certain places in a red creature with a long tail and a pitchfork, the devil, right? Similar responses right there. Eternal damnation. Okay. Some of these are Christian concepts. Most of them have a source somewhere in Judaism, and that's going to be what we're going to try to unpack today. Which of them is accurate, which of them is not, and most importantly, how accurate are they? In other words, if there's some sort of fire or hot or devil with a pitchfork, which, spoiler alert, there isn't. But if there is, where does that fit into the general perspective? And here we go. One more exercise. Sorry, we're doing 3 of them in a row. We're making you guys work today. On page 130, exercise 4.3. Here's the question. Rate the following experiences. Okay, so these are different experiences that may cause you pleasure. What degree of pleasure do you think they provide to you? From 1 to 10. In other words, are these less pleasurable or more pleasurable? 1 being the least pleasurable and 10 being the most pleasurable. Rate each one on a scale of 1 to 10. These answers we won't ask you to share, so nothing to be embarrassed of, okay? We would never ask you to share something like this. And I think you guys see where this is going already. If you don't yet, look at the bottom of page 130 where there's a question. Take a moment to analyze your responses to exercise 4.3. And what do your responses tell you about your conception of pleasure as a whole? What general genres of pleasure do you consider more pleasurable than others? This is just information that we would like for you to internalize and to analyze and to recognize, to appreciate about yourself. Who is they? Stephanie, I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
It says, degree of pleasure they would provide for you. Who is they?
No, they here is referring to these experiences. Sorry about that. So
These.
Right?
Okay.
Hawaiian cruise. How much pleasure do you think Hawaiian cruise provides for you? On a scale of 1 to 10. They not being people. In this case, they being experiences. So, and I want you to just if you're answering the question on page 130, leave it aside for a moment. In other words, answer the question, put your answer down. We're going to get back to this soon. All right? And don't worry, I'm going to start teaching eventually, I promise. I make you guys work very hard now. A lot of exercises, one after the other, but eventually I'm going to start teaching. Okay, we're going to move on. If you still feel like you need more time with that exercise, feel free to stay behind, lag behind a little bit, catch up with us when you can. On page 131, in order for us to begin our conversation about the afterlife and the Jewish view on the afterlife, heaven and hell, which we're going to analyze each one at a time specifically and bring sources, it's important for us to first open up with a conversation in general about reward and punishment. It's important to understand that Judaism, when Judaism looks at reward and punishment, there are lots of sources for that. There are many places in the Torah where reward is mentioned in both a physical and a spiritual form. Same with punishment. And of the two of them, spiritual reward is always more emphasized. Okay, I don't mean necessarily in the texts. I mean in the ideas, in the theology that's been passed down since Sinai. We're going to talk about this in just 1 minute. And the idea that we're really going to try to get to today is to really underscore the idea that spiritual reward is infinitely more enjoyable. That's where that exercise from before is going to come in, as we will talk about it in a moment. But for starters, let's open up with a text. Okay, where were we here? On page 132, our first text of the evening, we finally got into it 15-20 minutes into the lesson. Barbie, can I ask you to read, please, for us, text 1a?
Sure. The 11th of the 13 principles of Jewish faith is that God, blessed be he, rewards those who observe the commandments of the Torah and punishes those who transgress its prohibitions.
Okay, hold on, Barbie. I'm going to ask you to read text 1b. I just want to explain what we just read. What we just read is one small excerpt from a text called The 13 Principles of Faith by Maimonides. You may be familiar with this as the 13 Ani Ma'amins, or I believe, right? I believe with perfect faith in, and then there's 13 of them. And we'll talk in a moment about what these 13 principles of faith are, but I just want to side note, parenthetically mention that those Ani Ma'amins were actually not composed by Maimonides. That's a big misunderstanding that people have. That was just a poem that somebody wrote much later. I don't even know if we know the author of the poet. You can look it up on Google, I'm not sure. But it's basically like a poetic form of these 13 principles of faith. But what are principles? What are principles of faith? Maimonides, as many others, by the way, and that are not as popular as Maimonides in terms of, the average layman doesn't know about them, like Rav Yosef Elbo or the Sefer HaIkrim. There are different versions of how many principles to Judaism there have to be. Some say 13, some say 10, some say 18, 30. I think there's even one that's 30 something. I'm not sure exactly. Either way, a principle is supposed to be beyond a mitzvah. In other words, if you're doing a mitzvah, if you're studying the Torah, then you already have those principles of faith down pat. In other words, it's supposed to be the theory, the theology to Judaism that everything is built on. It's a principle, right? These 13 axioms that kind of support the rest of Judaism on them. As a result, they include some things like believing in Mashiach, of course, right? Because everything we believe that everything we do, every mitzvah, all study of Torah leads towards the coming of the Messiah, making the world a perfect place. One of them is obviously believing in God. Believing that the Torah is true. That's another big one, right? And that the Torah is divine, that it comes from God. These are obviously axioms. If you don't have that fundamental of your faith, and obviously we could discuss whether we do or don't believe them, how we can work on that belief, and that could be a whole, not just another class, but a series of classes that we can give. But certainly there has to be those fundamentals, that foundation upon which the rest of the faith is built. One of those ikrim, one of those principles, one of those foundations is, and number 11 is to believe in reward and punishment. And the Rambam elaborates, Maimonides elaborates. Barbie, can you finish off for us, please? Text 1b.
Okay, text 133, right? Yeah. The greatest reward of the world to come, the strongest punishment is to be cut off from the world to come.
So as part of this principle, Maimonides says, listen, I want you to understand that when we say believing in reward and punishment, we don't just believe that you might live a long life or that, different physical reward and punishment. Specifically, we're talking about spiritual reward and punishment. Okay? So therefore, the greatest reward is the pleasures of the world to come, and the greatest punishment is to be cut off from the world to come. Okay? Now, here's my question. I started to explain some examples of things that seem fairly obvious as to why they would be a principle of faith, right? Of the 13 of them, most of them you would imagine kind of make sense. Maybe some of them you'd be like, okay, I get it, whatever, right? Let me ask you a question. Let's assume that what the Rambam means here by reward and punishment is that there's some kind of big points balance, some kind of big bank. Every time we do a good deed, somebody's keeping tally, keeping score. And then the world to come, there's some sort of, I don't know, it's some big Hawaiian cruise, right? It's a big place where there's a lot of enjoyment for some reason for the soul on a spiritual level. I can get behind that. I can understand that. My one issue with this is, why would we consider this an ikar? Why would we consider this one of the principles of faith? In other words, wouldn't you think that believing in God, believing in making this world a better place, believing in the world actually becoming a better place one day as Mashiach, that would be part of what needs to be the foundation of Judaism? But reward and punishment, that would kind of be, it's the carrot and the stick. And that can kind of come as a bonus, as a surplus afterwards. And that's the big question that I want to open tonight's lesson with. Why? Because in order for us to properly understand why this would be a principle of faith, we really have to roll up our sleeves and understand what this reward and punishment really is. It's obviously not just a big tally of points. In fact, I would argue that such a view of God in general, some view that God is some sort of stronger being than us, greater being than us, higher being than us, more controlling being than us. Maybe as a rabbi, I would say he's got a little bit of control issues. So therefore he says, you know what, I'm bigger and stronger than you. So if you don't do what I say, whack, I have some sort of stick. And if you do what I say, I've got some sort of carrot. Now I know religion gets a lot of dogma about this, but if you think about it from a philosophical point of view, even a Jewish philosophical point of view, meaning a religious philosophical point of view, this makes absolutely no sense. We believe in a God that supersedes the world, that transcends the world, that's greater than the world, doesn't really care about the world. In other words, maybe he cares, but the world makes no difference to him. You know, it's like throwing a little pebble at, I don't know, not even at a great whale or whatever it is. When we do something negative, it's God choosing. We've spoken about this before. It's God choosing to have it affect him. So what's going on here with the reward and punishment? And that's why I'd like to take you one step deeper, if I may. We're going to quote the Recanati. And Joanne, if I can ask you please to read text 2. We're on page 134. The Recanti, who you can read all about, 12th century scholar, 13th century scholar that you can read all about in his bio, shares with us a very, very profound perspective. Go ahead.
Okay. Did you unmute me?
Yes.
Okay. Do not consider the punishments described in the Torah as comparable to penalties a person incurs for disobeying the decree of a mortal king. Not at all. Rather, they are completely natural consequences. For one who fails to observe a Torah commandment is denied the good that naturally results from its observance. It is comparable to one who fails to sow his field and therefore cannot reap a harvest, or one who fails to wear clothes and is then cold. It is as natural a consequence as the warmth provided by fire, the wetness of water, and the satiation of bread. In the same way, it is the nature of each mitzvah to provide the positive consequences that are promised for its observance, or the negative consequences that are stated regarding its transgression.
This is some profound stuff, and I want to take a moment to analyze it. In fact, the proper word might not be reward and punishment. Penalty might not be a good word. Consequence might be a much better word. What do we mean here? By way of example, let's take food, okay? We all need food to survive. Food is obviously a result of prior actions that are bringing about this result called food, sustenance that we can have. However, there are two ways of looking at the process that leads up to food, okay? Or two processes that we can look at that are both necessary, really, as part of food coming to us, okay? Process number one is as follows. We all work. We get up in the morning, right? We go to work, 9 to 5. If you're not and you're retired, then you're really just enjoying the fruits of your labor, but work that you did throughout your life, okay? Whether that's through Social Security or whether that's through your own 401k or whatever, or what have you. We all get up in the morning, we work. Work leads directly to money. You work, you get money. That's how it works. That's why we work, right? Hopefully we also have a job that we enjoy, but the primary reason why we work is in order to support our families. The work brings about money. With the money we go and we purchase food, right? Seems like a fairly simple 1, 2, 3 step process, right? 1 = 2 = 3. Perfect. But actually, I will argue that these are not necessarily natural consequences one from the other. I understand that you might not work if you didn't get money, but it's conceivable to think, and maybe perhaps we can consider volunteer work in this category, that somebody might work and not get money. It's not necessarily a natural reaction to working that you get money. It's the way of the world. It's understood. It's an unwritten agreement between any employer and, I mean, maybe it's even a written agreement between every employer and employee, right? But work doesn't naturally lead to money. Same thing with money leading to food. It's conceivable to think that somebody might get money, not be able to buy food. Maybe there's a food shortage. Maybe he doesn't have enough money to get food. Maybe the money that he has doesn't work in this particular area of the world, or whatever it is, right? We can use our brains, but the point, we can use our imaginations to kind of get to this. The point is that this is not necessarily a natural sequence. Contrast that by a different process, and this is the one we use as an analogy for reward and punishment in the Torah, which is much more natural one to the other. When a person sows, plants something in the ground, the fact of the matter is that you will reap. It rains, the sun, etc. Again, I get it. There can be, supernatural things will happen that won't happen. But it's a natural result that you plant something in the ground, you reap, and as a result of the reaping, you can now have food. This series here is a much more consequential series. Now, again, there might be other things that can play into why you might sow and you might not be able to reap. But there's no denying the fact that if somebody plants and then they get, and then afterwards they receive whatever, their field grows, that's not some reward for their planting, right? Or if you then take that wheat and use that wheat to grind it and make flour out of it, we're not calling that reward. That's results. That's consequences. That's natural reactions to what you did. I'll give one more analogy at the risk of sounding exhaustive. If a doctor tells you, listen, you've got you're overweight, you're headed towards an obesity issue. If you eat healthy and you exercise, you will lose weight and you will be a healthier person, and then you won't have any heart problems, you won't have, and all the different, whatever the particular medical issues this person is suffering with. This is not the doctor threatening you and saying, listen, it's in my power to make that you should be healthy or unhealthy. And if you do the things I tell you to, exercise, run twice and 3 times a week, whatever it is, cardio, and all the different good things, right? And eat healthy, then I will reward you by giving you good health. This is a natural outcome. And that's the argument that the Rekanti is making, that is the proper perspective that we should take on reward and punishment in the Torah. Let's keep going with text 3, and then I'll elaborate slightly more because I have one more point that I want to add to this. Stephanie, can I ask you please to read text 3 for us? Intrinsic consequence.
The reward of the mitzvah is a mitzvah, and the retribution for sin is a sin.
This is a Mishnah, and many of you might or not many of you, but a number of you that I recognize from having been just yesterday at the To Be a Mensch class. This is the text that we're studying at that class every Sunday morning with breakfast. If you'd like to join us, it's 11 a.m. every Sunday morning. It used to be that I used to serve breakfast after, on Sunday mornings, but now it's on Zoom and you bring your own breakfast. But we're studying ethics of our fathers, and we just did yesterday, by some kind of divine providence, boom, the whole thing worked out, that yesterday we were studying chapter 4, Mishnah 2, okay? And what that Mishnah shares with us is a very cryptic sentence. The reward for a mitzvah is the mitzvah, and the reward for a transgression is the transgression. The reward for a sin is, the punishment, the retribution for a sin is the sin. The simple meaning of this is fairly simple. If you do a mitzvah, God will provide you with an opportunity to do another mitzvah. If you start heading down the wrong path, God will provide you with more opportunities to keep going down that path. However, there is a deeper understanding here. Schar mitzvah, the reward for a mitzvah is a mitzvah, means that actually, when we say that there's some sort of points or tallying, that's not really true. What's going on is, every time you do a mitzvah, you are doing an action which is creating your reward. And again, this word reward is beginning to sound sillier and sillier. And the same thing when you do a negative action, that is creating your punishment. An example. You got a fellow who's a fairly upstanding, moral fellow, and he hasn't stolen a dime in his life. He falls on hard luck, hard times, and he walks into a bank, and he has this whole plan, and he successfully executes the plan to rob $1,000 in the bank. A couple of days later, after an investigation, he's caught. And now he's punished, okay? And a jury, a trial, the whole shebang, and it turns out that they decide, Nancy, don't laugh at me if this is completely not the case, but they decide that, listen, what you got to do is as follows. You got to return the $1,000. In addition, we're going to slap you with a $500 fine. And listen, it's your first time, 30 days in prison, and that's it. Hopefully you learn your lesson and you're off to go. Here's the question. What is the true punishment? What is the true consequence of the person's actions? Is it the fact that he has to return the $1,000? Certainly not. He didn't have the $1,000 to begin with. Is it the $500 fine? I would argue also not. I would argue the true punishment, the true loss that there is from this action is the very loss of innocence, the very act of robbery that this person did. He will never be able to say, I'm not a thief anymore. He will forever be wrestling with that double identity that he has. I'd like to think that today, 10, 15 years later, I'm a moral, upstanding person, but there was a time when I did steal. That innocence is lost. Anybody ever hear the phrase, you can never unsee that, or you can never unhear that, right? When do we say that? We say that when we see something so bizarre that it's like, oh my gosh, that had such an indelible impression on my mind that I will never be able to unsee that, right? How about saying you can never unact that? Does that make sense? When we do something wrong in this world, what we're essentially doing is creating a reality that right now, because we're not so spiritually in tune, and because we have a soul, but we also have a body, we might not be in tune with what sort of blemish and what sort of change in character and change in reality we did to ourselves. But the fact is that something is done every time we do something like that, every time we do something against the will of Hashem. And that is the true punishment, so to speak, for our actions. There is nothing else. That is it. And actually, the Zohar shares a very, very real and measure for measure text about this. So let's read this. Esther Necha, can I ask you please to read for us? We're at text 4 on page 136.
Okay. The fires of Gehenna are stoked in direct proportion to the degree to which the wicked fan their fiery passions. Accordingly, we must say that Gan Eden is amplified by the tremendous passion that the righteous invest in their Torah study and in their performance of God's commandments. They take great pleasure and delight in God Himself, and their deeds generate a corresponding abundance of light in Gan Eden.
I think these words, this language is really the most powerful way to illustrate this point. That the fire, so to speak, of Gan Eden, which we're going to address soon, what that is, what that pain is, and what that heat or fire or what have you is stoked directly in accordance with the person's actions, because it's a direct consequence. And the same thing with our reward. And I hope that this starts to reframe what exactly reward and punishment is. If we have such a proper perspective to understand that our action is our reward, when we do something good, when we do something bad, that itself is our punishment, that begins to put every time we do something good or bad into the right frame of mind. And now, to get back to our question, we might understand why this will be an ikar, why this will be a principle. You know why? Because if you come into it with a very superficial understanding of, all right, some big man in the sky and you do something wrong, is going to slap you on the wrist, forget the fact that you don't understand what punishment is. That's fine. Okay, no problem. You'll learn eventually, right? We all will at some point. The problem is that you don't understand what your actions are when you're doing them. Shlomo, it's not just midah keneged midah. Of course, it's midah keneged midah, but it's actually a proper understanding of what good and evil is in this world. And that, of course, has to be a principle upon which the entire faith is built. Because every time we're faced with the choice of good and evil, this is the proper understanding we have to have. That we are not only doing some, removed act, but we're actually creating our existence. I recognize that this is a very difficult thing, perhaps, to wrap our brains around. And I'd like to introduce at this point the meditation for this week from Rabbi Shais Tau. And he has some very powerful imagery to properly understand how the actions that we do in this world are, on a spiritual level, having much deeper repercussions than we might appreciate. Please turn your attention to the video screens.
Today's reflection meditation is going to help us begin to appreciate the massive influence that we have by performing one small deed here in this physical world while our souls are in bodies. There's somewhat of a paradox. On one hand, you see, we know that the physical world is just the tip of the iceberg. It's just one layer or level of reality, and that there is so much more to reality behind, in back of this veneer that we see, the physical world that we see. There are spiritual worlds behind spiritual worlds, behind spiritual worlds. And yet, at the same time, we know that what we do in this lowest world, in the physical world, has repercussions in the highest heavens. How do we wrap our minds around that paradox? That on one hand, we're in the lowest world, and on the other hand, we are affecting what goes on in spiritual realms. So the reflection that will help us with this is the visualization of a metaphor. Very simple metaphor. Imagine, if you will, a lever. What's a lever? A lever is basically two things. It's a stick and a wedge. You put the stick on the wedge, called the fulcrum, and you can lift things much bigger than you could without the lever. Now imagine you're lifting a big boulder, let's say. If you have a long enough lever, it's possible. Now when you are moving the long side of the stick, think about the fact that when you're moving that end just a little bit, it's causing massive fluctuations on the other end. That's like our world. On one hand, we're very far away from the fulcrum, but it's precisely because we're far away, then little movements on this end cause massive movements on the other end. Try to imagine yourself doing a mitzvah, a physical act. Something small in that it lasts for a moment. It takes place in one specific location. In that sense, it's small. And now imagine how that small movement is really moving the long side of the stick, the long side of the lever. Imagine how your small movement here in this world is causing massive movements in the heavens. We'll take a moment to visualize and to try to feel the leverage, the power that our small actions have.
And now that we have a proper understanding of how our actions affect the afterlife and how our actions actually create the afterlife, now it's time to unpack the two stages of the afterlife, namely what we like to call heaven and hell. Let's start with hell. We're on page 137. Actually, the word hell is a very bad word to use it. First of all, it's an English word, and as soon as it's an English word, it means that we have all sorts of associations with it. And in this instance, we have lots of negative associations with it, as we saw from our little exercise at the beginning of the class. As a result, if you don't mind, I'd like to introduce the Hebrew word for hell, and that is Gehenna. The name Gehenna actually comes from a physical place. There was a valley that was called the Valley Gei Ben Hinnom, the Valley of the Son of Hinnom. It was near Jerusalem, and you can find it mentioned in Yehoshua if you'd like to go check it up in Joshua, chapter 15, verse 9. Where it's described as the border between Yehuda and Binyamin. In any event, this is a place where the Jews had actually worshipped idols and sacrificed their children. Now is not the right time to get into all the various forms of idol worship that there were back in the day. But as a result, the Jewish people were going to be punished. And Yirmiyahu, the prophet who at the time was chastising the Jewish people for this, prophesied that this place will be a gay hariga in advance. In other words, he said where the idol worshippers will be punished because of the valley of killing. In other words, because this was a place that the Jewish people had sacrificed their children. So commentary have suggested that this term was borrowed to describe a spiritual place where the wicked receive their judgment. However, let's understand what exactly Gehenna is. The truth is that Gehenna, different than hell, is actually not a eternal damnation at all. It's actually a brief kind of rehabilitation stage, if you will, before a soul can enter Gan Eden, which is the next section of our lesson, when we're going to talk about the world to come and the pleasures of the world to come, etc. Right? Heaven, so to speak. It has to go through this process in order to cleanse it. You see, every one of our actions, as we mentioned earlier, has an effect on our soul. For example, we give tzedakah. Every time we give tzedakah, we give charity to another person, even though, of course, nobody will argue that the main purpose of giving tzedakah is for the other person and the effect that it has on them. There is a tremendous effect that when we give tzedakah, it has on us, right? Giving tzedakah makes us a giving person. This is why you might be familiar with some Jewish customs, such as, for instance, to give tzedakah every day. And if you don't have enough, not to give it all in one shot, and to make sure that you're giving every day, like that every day starts off in a way that we give tzedakah, right? Even from preschool and on, we give tzedakah every morning. Those of you that come to the daily minyan, you're familiar. We put out a pushka, we put out a charity box every morning for people to give a little bit of tzedakah. I promise you, it doesn't support the shul. You know, that's not making or breaking it, the $20, $30 that there are in the morning. But what we do when we give that dollar, when we give that quarter, when we give that penny even, is we're actually becoming giving people. Another custom that people have, for instance, is that they put a tzedakah box, a charity box in their kitchen. Why? Because they want to appreciate that when they have food, they should appreciate that when they're cooking food or eating food or what have you, they should give to others, right? It makes us into giving people, right? I don't understand. I could give $1 million when I earn it, and that's it. And that could be all my charity. And it could be way more charity than this little Jew who's giving $1 every morning and giving $1 before he eats, or while he's eating. No, but the idea here is it's not just the effect it's having on the other person, not to take away from that, but it actually has an effect on us. This is, by the way, why some people even have the custom to install a charity box in the wall of their home. Same idea. To create their home, to make their home a giving home, to actually install it in a very physical way in the walls of the building. Okay, but we've gone off topic. The idea here is that when we do something positive, it has an effect on us. And similarly, as we mentioned earlier, when we do something negative, that has an effect on us, on who we are. Now, perhaps sometimes it has an effect on our bodies, but primarily it has an effect on our soul. So imagine, if you will, a precious diamond, and every time we do something negative, it's getting dirtier and dirtier and dirtier, right? And there's all sorts of schmutz coming on, and it needs to be cleaned off. Gehenna, this stage, which we'll elaborate on shortly, is this entryway into heaven through which a Jewish soul needs to go in order to be cleaned off, in order to be rehabilitated. By way of example, and we're going to see some very physical, visualizations of this. We're going to use in text 5 the story of Acher. Acher was a man whose name was Elisha ben Avuya. Raise your hand if you've heard of Elisha ben Avuya before. Okay. Now put your hand down if the only reference you have to Elisha ben Avuya is from As a Driven Leaf by what was his name? I think it is the conservative rabbi. Joanne, that was your only reference to it? Okay, no problem.
Milton Steinberg? Is that
Milton Steinberg. That's who it was, right? Anyways, I nothing wrong with that. It's a great book. I read it myself, but most of it is fiction. I mean, a lot of it is references and he pulls from the Gemara, etc. At the end of it, one of the sections of the Gemara that he pulls from is text 5. For those of you that are unfamiliar with Acher, Acher means the other, and he was a great Talmudic sage by the name of Elisha ben Avuya. And at a certain point, he went down the path of heresy and denied Judaism and actually completely went away from Judaism. And at the last second, at the end of his life, he did teshuvah and returned before he returned to his maker. He was on the right path. Now, his one kind of mega fan who stuck with him all the way through was Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir was one of his primary disciples, younger than him, and passed away many years later. And here we're going to see an interesting dialogue between Rabbi Meir and kind of the other sages as Acher, at the time that Acher passed away. Steve, you said you knew who Acher was, right? You want to read for us, please? Text 5.
hang on.
We're on page 138.
I'm there. Elisha ben Abuya was a former Mishnaic sage who turned to such public heresy and treachery that he is derogatorily nicknamed Acher, something else. When Acher died, the heavenly court declared, "We will not afflict him with judgment in Gehenna, nor will we permit him to enter paradise." Their reasoning, "We will not afflict him with judgment because he studied much Torah, but we will not permit him to enter paradise because he sinned egregiously." Acher's famous disciple, Rabbi Meir, said, "Better that he indeed be judged and be punished so that he may enter paradise."
Imagine that. Thank you, Steve. Imagine that. You have a student who loves his master, his teacher greatly. And what is he praying for? He's praying for him to go to hell. Literally. Right? In America, it's become, slang. You tell somebody when you're not interested in them, you tell them go to hell. This man is praying for his master. They should go to hell. So if hell is some of our preconceived notions, we got a big problem here. What's going on here? But the truth is that he saw that his teacher was actually suffering. His teacher's soul was suffering tremendously. Why? Because worse than the purgatory or the rehabilitation, the cleansing process of Gehenna is to not even be allowed to go through that process of Gehenna and go into Gan Eden. And that's why Rabbi Meir prayed that Acher should actually be allowed to enter hell.
Who are the 5 people who will not go to Gan Eden?
We're getting to that.
Okay.
I actually don't mind mentioning it now. So I want to make something very clear. For the most part, if a person committed even one negative action in their lifetime, their soul goes through this soul catharsis, if you will, called Gehenna. And every single soul goes through this, and we're going to talk soon about the fact that there's a minimum amount of time and there's a maximum amount of time, 12 months, not more than 12 months for anyone. We're going to talk about this shortly. Most people do not go through 12 months. And what Steve is referring to and what we see here is some extreme instances. If someone literally was such a terrible, terrible person, then they might not be allowed into hell or into heaven, which are the 5 categories of people that Steve is referencing, which it talks about in Perek Chelek of Masechet Sanhedrin, in the last chapter of Masechet Sanhedrin, that there are 5 categories of people that don't enter hell. For the purposes of today's conversation, we're going to call those extreme, and the honest truth is that even those people, there are ways that they can enter, and it's not so terrible. But for now, let's talk about most people. In text 6, we have a little bit of a description as to what this place called Gehenna might look like. Marilyn, can I ask you to read for us, please? We're on page 130.
The purpose of Gehenna is to refine the soul and rid it of any sickness that it contracted. This is similar to the process of smelting silver, wherein the dross and sediment is burned away in a furnace, leaving the silver clean and free of impurities. Similarly, for the soul to be able to experience the light of the supernal pleasures and bask in God's radiance, it must first be refined in the spiritual fire of Gehenna, whereby the negative is purged from the positive.
Thank you, Marilyn. So now perhaps we have a much better appreciation of what Gehenna is. It's not eternal damnation. It's actually soul rehabilitation. So let's give Gehenna a much better English name. We've used this word Gehenna. How about we call it soul catharsis? Right? In other words, let's call it what it is. It's not some sort of terrible punishment, eternal damnation that if you do something terrible, that's where you're going to be, and that's where you're going to spend the rest of your life or the afterlife. But rather, it's simply the soul experiencing the negative effects of its actions. And that process of cleaning it from those negative actions is actually very, very painful. But the result of it is that now the soul can enter paradise. But just by way of illustration, emotional connection with this idea, imagine, if you will, something negative that you did throughout your life. I'm going to give an example, and it's going to be a very mundane example and a very simple and stupid example, but I think it'll even if even here it serves to illustrate that purpose. Imagine how much more so when you magnify it. Imagine, if you will, that you go. You know what? I'm not going to accuse anybody else of doing this. Only I do this. I go to Ralph's, okay, and I finish shopping. I bring my car, my groceries back. I put them in the trunk. I close the trunk, and I leave the cart where it is. Instead of bringing it back, as a mensch should, back to the where all the carts are, I just leave it around there. And I have all the good reasons in the book. Maybe I took the cart from there originally, so I'm not contributing to this issue. Maybe I say to myself, you know what? There's a guy who gets paid for this. He goes around the parking lot and collects them, right? Maybe I say all sorts of reasons that I have as to why I'm really a mensch, but what I'm doing, right? It's a very mundane example, right? But let's take this mundane example and let's magnify it, all right? Let's say that I happen to know that there's 1,000 people sitting in audience chairs, like you guys are, and they all had popcorn and soda, and they're watching me. And they're just watching what I'm doing. What are the chances that I would leave that cart exactly where it is? Absolutely zero. Of course, I'm going to do the menschliche thing and put it back where it belongs, right? Because everybody's watching. I'm so conscious of my actions. Now, what happened to all the good reasons that I had as to why I was doing the wrong thing? And they might have been very good reasons. They all go out the window when all of a sudden you're exposed to everybody, and everybody's going to see that, the shame and the embarrassment, right? Imagine if you didn't know they were watching, and then only afterwards you find out that they're watching. That shame could be all-consuming. All right? Now, we did this with a very mundane example. Translate it to whichever negative action you feel you may have done throughout your life when you did go against your moral compass, etc. That experience is extremely painful. Now, even that experience pales in comparison, because we, even as human beings, even if the whole world is watching, we don't fully appreciate the effect of a negative action that we do. Like, for instance, we may eat non-kosher, and we're not so embarrassed in front of other people because they don't really appreciate what non-kosher is. All right, if there's a whole bunch of Jews that are watching us dig into pork, that might be very embarrassing, right? But it's more of a social embarrassment. Now imagine the soul coming up to heaven and being confronted with not only the fact that it's revealed for everyone to see and for truth to see it, but it's actually revealed in its full, schmutz, so to speak. Exactly what the repercussions of this action are. That's terribly painful for the neshama. And this brings us to text 7. Where are we holding here with the reading? Elise, can I ask you please to read for us? Text 7 is on page 139. Don't forget to unmute yourself.
Okay, the purpose of Gehenna is to refine the soul.
Hold on, where are you?
139.
No, the next one, sorry, text 7.
I'm sorry. I thought it sounded familiar. Okay. Okay, well, it starts on this page. Then an individual will also see himself in a new light. Even in our mortal physical state, looking at oneself can sometimes be pleasing and other times very painful. Imagine standing naked before God with your memory wide open, completely transparent, without any jamming mechanism or reducing valve to diminish its force. You will remember everything you ever did. You will see it in the light of the unshaded spirit, or if you will, in God's own light that shines from one end of creation to the other. The memory of every good deed and mitzvah will be the sublimest of pleasures, but your memory will also be open to all the things of which you are ashamed. They cannot be rationalized away or dismissed. You will be facing yourself, fully aware of the consequences of all your deeds. We all know the terrible shame and humiliation experienced when one is caught in the act of doing something wrong. Imagine being caught by one's own memory with no place to escape. A number of our great teachers, such as Joseph Kalbo, Akurian, Manasseh ben Israel, Nishma Chaim, write that the fire of Gehenna is actually the burning shame one experiences because of one's sins. Of course, these concepts, as used by our sages, may also contain deeper mysteries and meanings. But a major ingredient of this fire may be shame. How else could one characterize the agony of unconcealed shame upon a soul? We are taught, Talmud, that the judgment of the wicked lasts 12 months. The pain eventually subsides.
So it turns out that the soul's capacity to experience spiritual pleasure is diminished because of its very own misbehavior. The soul cannot enter paradise. And it has to go through that process in Gehenna where truth exposes all. And then it starts to see how how our ego got in the way and prevented the soul from experiencing truth. It's a very painful process for the soul, but it's very, very cleansing. Now, let's talk a little bit about timelines here, because everybody wants to know how long it is, right? So it turns out that there's actually a very specific timeline. Larry, can I ask you to read for us text 8?
That is, the maximum sentence of the wicked in Ganim is 12 months.
And keep going to text 9. After those 12 months,
each member of the Jewish people has a portion in the world to come, as it is stated in Isaiah 60:21. Your people are all righteous. They shall inherit the land forever. They are the branch of my planting, the work of my hands, in which I take pride.
So the maximum sentence here is 12 months. Now, I should point out that the maximum sentence here is 12 months, but according to the previous Rebbe, who was culling this from all sorts of sources, he says that most people are 9 or 10 months, which is kind of the most. And for somebody who actually keeps Torah and mitzvos, that's actually a lot less. He says, I would say more like 4 or 5 months. So in other words, it's kind of a spectrum, or right, somewhere between 1 month to 12 months. Probably we all fall somewhere between 3 and 9 months in terms of our hell experience, so to speak, this cleansing process. And after that, every single soul enters Gan Eden. Every single soul enters this spiritual bliss, which we're going to talk about in just a moment. However, I want to point something out. We listen to this and we think to ourselves, well, then, okay, this is good news. It's going to be this cleansing process, but it might not be that long. The answer is, we don't even need to wait until then. The fact of the matter is that we don't need to wait until Gehenna in order to start the cleansing process. We can start the cleansing process down here. In fact, that is exactly what Teshuvah is all about. The maximum sentence is 12 months, but we can get that off for good behavior. Like this in Nancy, is this starting to sound familiar? We can get it off for good behavior. But on a serious note, with true Teshuvah, this can cleanse us of any serious blemishes or any serious, schmutz that there is, dirt that there is covering the soul, which will stop the soul from entering Gehenna, from entering, Gan Eden, heaven. Now, I want to point out, for those of you that are familiar with Teshuvah, the Rambam Maimonides, when he explains what Teshuvah is, perhaps to some of you this seems very simple, but it's actually, he points out that what is Teshuvah? Teshuvah is regret on past actions, true regret on past actions, and true resolve for the future. Essentially, it ends up being not that much different than Gehenna. It's kind of a version of doing that in this world. True Teshuvah is a very painful process, even in this world, to go through your actions and to really face them and to appreciate them. I would venture to say that most people in this world don't really do that often. And at least in the secular world, this is done probably most often by addicts. And they will all tell you that this is a very painful process. To go through in a sober state, to go through everything that they did while they were, addicted, and while they were through their addiction, is usually, first of all, it's usually a 1, 2, 3 year process, and even that is on the low end of how long it'll take them to go through it. We're talking about a true addict that actually has to face it, and usually they will reach such a low and such a shame and such an embarrassment of who they are. That's true Teshuvah, recognizing that I have true regret for all those actions and resolving not to do them anymore in the future. Okay, let's stop for a minute for questions. By the way, I will add to that our sages also tell us that whenever we suffer in this world, so this goes out to all those that feel like they suffer too much, whether it's just you overdoing things that are mundane issues that we have in our own lives, or whether it's true tragedy, losing a loved one and that kind of thing, or going through a surgery or a life-changing experience. These sufferings also count towards the cleansing of the neshama, which we can explain how that works a different time. Let's stop now for questions. We're doing pretty good on time, so I want to stop for some questions. Anybody?
Yeah, does everybody pass ultimately? Even the most evil person eventually get out of Gehenna?
Absolutely, with the exception of certain people. If I can we leave that out of today's conversation? Steve was referencing those people earlier, that in Tractate Sanhedrin, the Talmud references that there are 5 categories of people that can, even they can be barred from entering, but the truth is that any person can enter. But with the exception of those 5, because nobody on this Zoom falls under that category, every single person enters, every single person enters the world to come, paradise, after a maximum sentence of 12 months of purification process.
Zusha, I have a question. So it doesn't matter what type of offense person did. Did he steal? Did he murder? Did he offended the widow? Was he rude to somebody? Doesn't matter. It's same 12 months.
No. Of course it does. First of all, each of those might be adding time. I'm no expert exactly in how this works, but all of these things, depending on how grave they are, think about it. How embarrassed would you be if 1,000 people see you and even you have to face the reality of the fact that you didn't return your shopping cart? And how embarrassed would someone be if they murdered someone and then are faced out in the open with all that, etc. Right? I mean, you need nothing more than all of those images that are etched in all of our minds of choose whoever you want, Bernie Madoff or O.J. Simpson, whoever you want. Whenever they all exit the courthouse, you know that perp walk that they do, where they exit the courthouse and they're taken to the cop car, and it's always a thousand reporters, etc. What are they all doing? Covering their faces, every single one of them. Jerry Seinfeld has a great bit on this. He says, "I don't understand. Who are they embarrassed of? You know, like the whole world knows what you did. Who are you embarrassed of?" But the fact is that it's so shameful. I don't understand. He wasn't ashamed when he did it? No, he wasn't. Because then he didn't have to face the full throttle of what it means, the effects of his actions. But now that he is being forced out, and I would argue that even that is not the full throttle.
It's like animal response. The dog covers his face with a paw, when he feels ashamed. So that's what certain people do.
Right. But here the idea is, and Mickey, we'll get to your question next. Here the idea is that depending on how great the offense is, that's how deep the cleansing has to be. So certainly it's different. So Simcha Bracha, the answer is 2 things. First of all, certainly the amount of time would change. And secondly, I would say that the amount of the quantity and then the quality as well, how intense, how painful that is. And today we're not really going to talk about that, the different types of hell that there are, like different types of cleansing that there are, etc.
Rabbi.
1 second, Mickey had a question. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, well, I think you answered my question, Rabbi. It was because we've talked initially a lot about the variation in time that maybe one would have to be in the Gehinnom. So my question was basically around does the intensity vary?
Absolutely.
From person to person, the depth of the pain, because pain can be very severe, or pain, there's many levels of pain and suffering.
Right. So I'm happy to enter a little bit into this conversation. I don't want to do too much. There are different types of Gehenna that I mentioned. There's a concept called Chibut HaKever, which means kind of the beating of the grave. These are all physical words that are used to describe something very spiritual. There's something called Kaf HaKela, which is kind of like a slingshot for the soul, kind of going from one extreme to another extreme to another extreme. These are all different versions of cleansing process, and they all fall under the same category of the confronting the consequence of our actions. They might be different ways of doing that, and that might be depending on the action, and I'm no expert in that specifically. Obviously, I mean, Hashem knows each person, and listen, that's the good news, that if we believe in Hashem, we believe that He's also going to be fear, and that there's a process, and not only is it going to be fear, it's going to be an automatic fearness. In other words, because it's the reaction of our own actions. Laura, we'll get to you in just a second. Yosef Ilan, you had a question. Go ahead.
Yes, it was more of a clarification, at least for myself. Isn't that cleansing the process of my own recognition of what I have done and the depth of evil that I have done? So therefore, the cleansing is going to be equal to that, and it comes from within me. It's not coming from outside. It's not coming from other sources. It's coming from within myself.
The only outside source that I can think of is it comes from truth, because that
but that is
a common word used to describe the afterlife is olam ha'emes. Anybody ever hear that term? The world of truth.
Yeah. But wouldn't you say that at that point you have already recognized the world of truth? You have recognized that truth is the ultimate. Therefore, it's still from within yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah, I guess so. I guess that's one way of looking at it. Laura, go ahead.
Okay, I have 2 questions. The first one's a simple yes or no question. according to Judaism, is this process with the Gehinnom considered to be for all humans or specifically for Jews only?
For all humans, it does differ between Jews and non-Jews. I think that's beyond the scope of today's lesson.
Okay, and then you mentioned that this information was culled from many sources, and so I'm just wondering how we know how do we know it's
100%. So I mentioned that line, which I recognize is very vague. I mentioned that line specifically when I was quoting the previous Chabad Rebbe, which actually you'll notice they chose not to put that text inside, because he was referencing 1 month, 3 to 4 months, 9 to 10 months, etc. I don't know where he gets all that from, but everything we're discussing today comes directly from the Torah. Some of it we've shown the texts, and some of it comes from the oral Torah, which means it's in the tradition that's been passed down as we go along, which means that they're in lesser known texts, but which transcribed the oral tradition as time went on. If your question is, how do we know that those are true, the Torah and meaning the written Torah and the oral Torah, the answer is that that's a full course that I gave, and I actually sent it out in my first follow-up email to the first lesson. I sent it out. It was called Judaism Decoded, and that talks a lot about the truth of Sinai and why we believe that. Meaning, today we're analyzing principle number 11, which is reward and punishment of Maimonides. But principle number, I think it's 3, which is believing in the truth of Sinai, that the Torah comes from God, the written Torah and the oral Torah, is analyzed in that course called Judaism Decoded. Again, if you're not a subscriber to my YouTube channel, I highly recommend it. And there's a 6-lesson course that I gave last spring, which I highly recommend checking out.
Thank you.
All right, so let's get back to it. So that is Gehenna. Now on to what we call heaven, or the world to come. So obviously, as we said with punishment, reward is just a consequence of our action. However, it's important to understand that we can never fully grasp these ideas, because it's to imagine the unimaginable. Let's see text 10. Nick, can I ask you to read for us, please? Page 143.
Spiritual reward is abstruse and difficult for mortal intellect to visualize and grasp, as long as the intellect remains attached to a corporeal body. Just as one who is blind cannot grasp the concept of colors, so the spirit that is engaged with corporeality cannot grasp purely spiritual matters.
Thank you, Nick. So the Barbanel is telling us, imagine trying to explain to a blind person what colors are. He doesn't have any barometer by which to compare this to. You try to compare it to smells and to tastes, but it's a whole different type of sense. And there is no way to explain to him the beauty of what colors are and the difference between the different colors. And when you put a whole bunch of colors together, it can form a certain beauty, etc. Right? Take it a step further. Imagine after that trying to explain to him what modern art looks like. You know what I mean? Like these abstract paintings. There's no way he'll ever be able to appreciate it. And it's very sad for the person who's blind. But think about ourselves and try to apply that sadness to ourselves. We are souls in physical bodies. So the moment you start to tell somebody spiritual pleasure, by the way, I will mention that spiritual reward is not found in the Torah, in the written Torah anywhere. Spiritual reward and punishment. There are some physical rewards and punishment, but never spiritual reward and punishment. There's a lot of discussion about why that is. For those of you that attend the Monday night class, which is now on break for JLI, for this course, the faith and trust in God class, we spoke a lot about that in Chovas HaLevavos. Why spiritual reward and punishment are not mentioned in the Torah. One of the reasons is because it's impossible for a human being really to comprehend that. So what are we even doing here? Right? But let's try to imagine it, okay? Text 11 is the Talmud that kind of gives us a certain a perspective on it. Ron, can I ask you to read for us, please? Text 11, page 144.
In the hereafter, there is no eating, drinking, procreation, commerce, jealousy, hatred, or competition. Rather, the righteous sit, their heads adorned with crowns, and they delight in the radiance of the divine presence.
Thank you. I want you to imagine for a moment, and perhaps we can go back a little bit to the different types of pleasure that we spoke about earlier, right? Imagine for a moment the intimate bond that we have with another human being when we develop a relationship with them, a close loved one. Now that relationship, believe it or not, a lot of people don't get this right away, but is actually limited by the fact that we're physical, right? And you'll hear like romantic writers and that kind of thing talking about this sometimes. Oh, he loved her so much that he wanted to just leave his body because his body couldn't contain the love, right? In other words, the physical body actually limits the relationship that there can be between two people. Another way of looking at a mitzvah is as a connection point with God, right? We know actually the Hebrew word for mitzvah, right? Mitzvah actually has the same root as the word tzavta, which means connection, because when we do a mitzvah, we're forging a connection with God. That spiritual relationship, that's true joy. That's true, not joy, true pleasure. It cannot be compared to eating or drinking or sleeping. And that's what the world to come, the paradise that we talk about that comes after Gehenna, is like. So what you want to do is you want to think of that not physical, but the not spiritual either. I guess the emotional relationship that you have with another human being, and the person you've been closest to your entire life, whoever that is, and then magnify that 1,000-fold, because now we're talking about a relationship with the divine, right? And one that supersedes all physicality. That's not limited by physicality. It's the soul uniting with God. Okay. I want to stop to remind everybody why we're doing all this. Okay. The psychology of understanding these things helps a person to cope with loss. There's a lot of psychology here. In other words, we spoke a lot last week about, how to comfort a mourner and how to be, and if you are the mourner, how to comfort yourself and how to recognize, how to get past grief, etc. A lot of that ties into, obviously, like we spoke about last week, the eternal nature of the soul and how the soul continues on, etc. But then there's where is the soul? Understanding that really helps a person to cope with loss. In fact, you turn to page 144, you'll start to see how psychologists have grappled with this over time. In 2007, a systematic review of 32 different scientific studies, okay, over a period of 15 years, from 1990 to 2005. So this is a study on studies. This is one study or one review of 32 different studies over a period of 15 years. So the science is getting better because it's over a long period of time. And the data that was contained within these studies was from 5,715 different people. Okay, so between the 32 studies, each one had a different amount of people. And you can look this up. This is referenced in the note here. The study is called Becker G. et al. Do religious or spiritual beliefs influence bereavement? The topic of the study was to try to figure out, does religious belief, right? How much does that help a person cope with loss and deal with bereavement? And 22 studies reported positive effects, 6 reported limited positive effects, but only 2 of them reported no positive effects, and only 1 of them reported some negative effects. And these studies are from all over the world. These studies are from different times over a 15-year time frame. And the reason for this is because, to put it simply, 94% of the studies, when they were analyzed, showed that that when a person appreciates where the soul is going, and we're not even talking here about the truth of the belief that the person has. We can speculate on that for a lot. But even just the psychology of it, understanding that that there is somewhere the soul goes, what the soul is going through, and how much the soul could or cannot suffer, etc. That's huge. And that now starts to bridge that gap to, okay, that's what's going on with the soul, heaven and hell, right? And many of us are interested in this for different reasons. Some of us, for ourselves, we want to know where we're going, and some of us want to know where our loved ones are. In the next section, I'd like to take some time to talk about the fact, and this will tie directly to what we said last week and 2 weeks ago about our relationship with our loved ones that left this world continuing. I'd like to talk about the fact that we can actually do things to help and to ease that soul through that process. So we spoke a lot about the fact that, if your loved one has a certain language that they speak, whether it's a verbal language or whether it's an emotional language, a physical language, etc., right? Many of us are familiar with the 5 love languages. You got to get in tune with that wavelength. Similarly, once the soul leaves the body, we have to learn how to speak the soul's language. So now we understand where the soul is going through, and we appreciate that there's many steps to this stage. And as the soul is going through this, we did this already, but the soul is actually in a constant state of progressive elevations. In other words, it leaves purgatory. It leaves the cleansing process of hell or Gehenna or the soul catharsis, and it moves on to paradise. And then from then on, it's in a constant state of progressive elevations, closer and closer to God, which is obviously unlimited. So it's constantly having these elevations. We here in this world can affect how much elevation or how easy the cleansing process for our loved ones is actually going. And we do this in a very simple way, through mitzvahs. Why? Because mitzvahs is the language now of the soul. As Arnold mentioned earlier, the soul is now in the world of truth. And therefore, it doesn't care anymore about the fact that you're drinking tea or you're enjoying a good steak. The only thing that the soul does care about are the mitzvahs that are being done. And unfortunately, and obviously for good reason, the soul can no longer do those mitzvahs. So only people that can are the human beings here on earth. And that's where we get to different things that the living can do on behalf of the deceased. In text 12, Russell, can I ask you to read for us, please? On page 146 in text 12, we get a responsa, again, from that era of the questions and answers with the rabbis. Sorry, Russell just left. I guess he pressed the wrong button. Simcha Bracha, can I ask you to read, please? I don't know if she's there. Margarita, are you there?
No, but I cannot read.
Oh, you can't read. Okay, I'm sorry.
I don't have my glasses.
Oh, okay, no problem. So Laura Reutman, if I can ask. Third time to try. Go for it.
Text 12.
Yes.
When individuals act righteously and are outstanding in the service of their Creator, they generate tremendous merit for the souls of their parents. This merit is simply by virtue of their parents having served as the instruments of their births. It is the parents who enabled their soul to be born into this world, which in turn enabled the many righteous deeds that they perform. The parents, therefore, have a share in their meritorious acts. However, anyone's charity or prayers on behalf of a departed person are beneficial for the soul of the deceased. It is therefore a Jewish custom to give charity and do other good deeds on behalf of the deceased in order to cause satisfaction to the soul.
Thank you, Laura. So this comes directly, this affects directly what is going on with the soul up in heaven. Now, this can be done by anyone, right? Any person can do an act, a good deed on behalf of this soul and help cause its elevation or its elevation as it, the progression as it's going up, or to help ease it through its pure cleansing and purification process. But obviously, anything that's done by a soul that is the progeny, a loved one of that soul, obviously, because they're essentially connected, every mitzvah is connected. In fact, one of the views of this is coming up soon in a text, I think. Hold on. No. One of the views of this is to appreciate that every time a son does a mitzvah or a daughter does a mitzvah, this is actually an extension of the parents. Because the parents brought this child into the world, they get a certain amount of credit for that mitzvah. This happens even during the parents' lifetime, right? Never mind the fact that they actually educated the child, so they certainly get credit for that, right? They brought the child up. So forever, those offspring doing those mitzvahs are actually affecting that soul because they are an extension of it. Now, of course, it's also on an essence level connected because their souls have a direct bond. But this can also be accomplished by others. The only difference is that if it's someone else trying to do a mitzvah to elevate that person's soul, whether it's learning something, etc., so then it has to have a meditated, focused, thought process as you're doing it. Hence, all of the customs to sponsor a Kaddish in memory of someone, so that everybody says l'chaim and everybody's making brachas, etc., in memory of that person. To sponsor a class, a Torah class, that's such an amazing thing to do. And if you don't know of a class you can sponsor, there are many available here at the Pasadena Jewish Academy. But what are you doing when you do that? You pay whatever it is, $500 for 10 people to sit around and study. And at the beginning of the class, they announce this is for the elevation of the soul of this person. So everybody is thinking that this mitzvah, this Torah study is for that person. That's for the soul, so to speak. And that's a very powerful tool to help it elevate. We're going to talk about other things like Kaddish, etc. I just want to stop for a second to talk about a time frame for these things. Obviously, the most powerful time to do these things is during the 12 months after the passing of the soul. The reason for this is twofold. First of all, we mentioned earlier, as we were talking about the soul's, the stages of the soul's departure from the body, over the course of the first 12 months, the soul is still in middle of going up, so it needs help with that. And to this week, we discussed that the soul is also going through that cleansing process, right? That year after the neshama leaves the body, the neshama is still in limbo. It's still going through that cleansing process in order to get. Somebody mentioned the word limbo. That's why it stuck in my head from earlier when we asked what your view of hell is. And so this can help ease the process. But of course, each year on the yard site, because the neshama experiences like a quantum leap, like a jump in elevation in terms of spiritual status. So that's very important. And then, of course, the times in the year when we say Yisker. And I want to take a moment now, but just in case people are not familiar with it, Yisker is primarily giving charity in honor of the soul. We do come to shul and we say a prayer, but the real idea behind Yisker is to do a mitzvah, to do an actual act in memory of that soul. So we actually give extra tzedakah before the holiday on which we say the Yisker prayer. That's the real, or if we didn't, then to at least pledge it on the holiday, and then after the holiday give it. That's the real idea, because Yisker is helping to elevate that soul. Of course, the prayer helps that, and that's the mechanism. But the real act that does it is the okay. So let's talk about some things that we can do. So on page, sorry, so let me take this now. This is for Kaddish. We're going to talk about that shortly. I know we're getting very practical here, but I think once we have the theoretical conversation and we really understand what's going on here on a psychological and on a spiritual level, this begins to tie directly into all the physical actions that we do. Think on page on page 147 and 148 about all of the things that we do as human beings, and you're all familiar with this, especially if you've lost a loved one. But even if you haven't, you're familiar with all of these ideas, all of these things, and there's I think you guys have the footnotes here, right? The sources for all these customs on the bottom or in the back, maybe. Are there numbers at the end of each one? Okay, by me, I have all the sources. I'm sorry they didn't share that with you. Giving tzedakah, right? That's something we do. And this is whenever. This is, in other words, this is, you talk to someone or you talk to yourself that misses a loved one. These are the methods of communication with that soul. These are the methods that we can actually help that soul and do something for that soul. You know, we talk about the guilt of being alive, the guilt of survivor's guilt, right? That a person feels like they want to continue the relationship and it's too late, etc. These are the things we can do to actually further that relationship with the deceased. Tzedakah, Yisker, studying Torah, that's a big one, specifically the study of Mishnah. Providing financial support to Torah scholars, right? So that's studying Torah or supporting others in studying Torah. So it doesn't have to be a Torah scholar. I know they always use that word, but it can be a group of people studying Torah, right? Sponsoring a Torah class, sponsoring or donating books on Torah that are going to be. Anybody ever see this? You walk into a Jewish library, every book has got a sticker, right? In honor of, in memory of this person. Why? Why all the? Why we? Because every time that a person is going to study Torah from this book, they'll open it up. It was sponsored. It was that was enabled by this soul, and therefore it causes elevation for that soul. And then more recently, there is this custom to write or donate a Torah scroll in the deceased's honor. The customs for the yard site on page 148 are to light a 24-hour candle, say the Kaddish, which we're going to talk about in just a minute, visit the gravesite and recite chapters of Psalms. There are specific Psalms that are customary, but if you need guidance on that, feel free to reach out when that time comes. Donate to charity, study Torah, again, especially Mishnah. Again, there's certain Mishnahs. We try to do the chapters of Mishnah that correspond to the letters of the name of the person. Get an aliyah to the Torah on the Shabbat preceding the yard site. Sponsor a Kaddish. We spoke about that earlier. Or convene a gathering of relatives and friends where you're going to talk and learn from that person's life. Think about how powerful that is for the soul. A whole bunch of people sitting around. What are they discussing? How I'm going to make my life better as a direct result of this soul that's going through whatever it is going through up in heaven. That's very powerful. That means there's real good deeds being done by that soul, which is impossible now. The soul can't do any mitzvahs now. And yet all these people are going to help the soul do that, are going to enable that to happen. And now it's time to talk about Kaddish. Kaddish is, of course, the most well-known Jewish mourning custom. We do it for 11 months after a person's neshama passes away. And I want to start off by just analyzing the English text, the text in English, if we can. Where are we holding here? Mickey, you want to read for us, please? Text 13 in English, please.
There we go. Okay, I'm sorry, page text
Page
13.
Yes.
49.
Exalted and hallowed be his great name throughout the world which he has created according to his will. May he establish his kingship, bring forth his redemption, and hasten the coming of the Mashiach. In your lifetime and in your days and in the lifetime of the entire house of Israel, speedily and soon, and say Amen. May his great name be blessed forever into all eternity. Blessed and praised, glorified, exalted and extolled, honored, adored, and lauded be the name of the Holy One, blessed be he. Beyond all blessings, hymns, praises, and consolations that are uttered in the world, and say Amen. May there be abundant peace from heaven and a good life for us and for all Israel, and say Amen. He who makes peace in his heavens, may he make peace for us and for all Israel, and say Amen.
Thank you, Mickey. You know, for a lot of people, this ends up being a very big wake-up call. They're like, what? So Kaddish has nothing to do with my loved one? It's just all about proclaiming the oneness of God and the greatness of God? What's going on here? So we're going to talk about what's so potent about this in just a second in text 14. And actually, Carol, if I can ask you to read for us, please. Carol Grant. But I also want to reference, there's a very powerful story, a fascinating encounter that Rabbi Akiva had that demonstrates the power of Kaddish. And you can check that out. It's text 20 in the appendix. We're not going to read it here, but I highly recommend checking it out. For now, we're going to move on to text 14, the greatness of Kaddish. Go ahead.
Every member of the community of Israel is, in a sense, among those who establish and proclaim God's sovereignty in this world. As the verse states, you, Israel, are my witnesses, God declares. Therefore, the absence of any individual creates a void, as it were, in God's sovereignty in the world. In order to fill this void, others need to intensify their work and to proclaim on their own behalf, as well as on the behalf of the deceased. Exalted and hallowed be his great name. With this perspective, we can understand why reciting the Kaddish elevates the soul of the deceased. The aggregate of a person's actions and accomplishments in this world define his or her life. However, the tally of a person's achievements does not necessarily conclude at the moment of death. A complete evaluation of a person's accomplishments must also include all that is accomplished as a result of the person's inspiration and actions. Therefore, when those who remain alive, and especially the person's children and descendants, whose very existence is a credit to their forebears, then do good deeds, they contribute to the deceased's balance of accomplishments. For although the deceased is no longer active in this world, his or her actions continue to inspire positive deeds and actions. That is why the recitation of Kaddish elevates the soul, because God is being exalted in this world as a result of and in the name of the deceased.
And this follows directly from everything we were talking about earlier, about this idea that the soul cannot do these things anymore, but by us doing them as direct result of that soul, we're actually causing that soul to be elevated. I want to take a moment to point out that this particular class that we're studying now is actually being studied in the 11-month Kaddish period of the author of the text that we just read. Rabbi Yadin Even Yisrael Steinsaltz passed away recently, just a few months ago. And to paraphrase this very reading, although Rabbi Steinsaltz, is no longer active in this world, his actions continue to inspire positive deeds and actions, including this very class. Right? So all of us here are studying and exalting God as a result of and in the name of Rabbi Even Yisrael, Rabbi Steinsaltz, of blessed memory. May his neshama have an aliyah in heaven. Right? That his whole life, I'll point this out about him, that his whole life was devoted to establishing and proclaiming God's sovereignty in the world. For those of you that know some of his accomplishments with translating the Talmud and all the books that he wrote, etc., I'm sure there are people here that read many of his books. And I cannot think of a more direct way to drive this home, what it is that Kaddish does specifically. Okay. All this being said, we are going to conclude with a little discussion about priorities. You know, some people here might be a little bit dejected. They're like, oh, I thought there was a tally of points. And then when we get up there, we get rewarded for all our actions. Now you're telling me the reward for our actions is only just the effect of our actions. I hope nobody has that question, but just in case, think of the following analogy. Imagine a man, I would use COVID, by the way, but it's still, COVID really still doesn't, it pales in comparison to cancer. Imagine a man, scientist sitting in a lab somewhere, and he comes up with this great idea. Boom, this is the cure to cancer. He figured it out. A pill you can take, no matter who you are in the world. You even start getting cancer, boom, you can take this pill and the whole thing is gone. All right, he spends a couple of years developing it. He figures it out. He markets it. He figures out how to get it to the whole world. And slowly, people that have cancer are starting to be cured. People that have struggled with this for years, fighting it, battles, etc. Right? Okay. The people in where is it? In Switzerland, in Sweden, the Nobel Prize Commission. I think so, somewhere there, right? They're sitting there and they're watching from afar. You know, they don't want to give the prize preliminary, too early. And they're watching and they wait a year or two, and it turns out it's true. Yeah, and all the science comes out. There's no long-lasting effects. This one man cured cancer. And they call him down. They send him an official invitation. We want you to come down. We're going to honor you by presenting you with the Nobel Prize. Right? Beautiful. He's honored. He comes down with his friends and his family, and they come and they give him, I don't even know, what is the Nobel Prize? I think it's a couple $100,000. Less? Anybody know? What is it? Whatever it is.
A million.
$1 million? Okay, $1 million. They give him $1 million, and the plaque or the trophy or whatever it is, and his name is all over, etc., whatever, right? Imagine this man coming up there to receive it. Imagine the silliness in his head of this award. You really think your $1 million, your world acclaim, your anything you could do for me is gonna even come close? In Yiddish, we say even come to the piatas, even come to the heels of the true reward of what I did. You think I did it for this? You think this is what I need? It's all nice things. It's nice for people to acknowledge it. But the true reward of his action is to know that he cured cancer, is to know that there are millions of people around the world that now will live because of him. I mean, there's nobody on this Zoom that doesn't know somebody struggling with cancer, right? Imagine a world that doesn't have cancer. It's like, it's unbelievable. That's the true reward. The true reward is the actual action that he did. And we're going to drive that home in the next two texts with which we're going to end tonight's lesson. Where are we here? Shlomo, can I ask you to read these last two texts? Text 15 and then text 16. And by the way, Shlomo, I know Shlomo would appreciate the power of these two texts. These two people, at least in history, go down as being on two separate sides of the aisle. On text 15 is from the Vilna Gaon, a famous leader of the Misnagdic movement, and text 16 is from the Alter Rebbe. Well, it's going to be quoted from the Alter Rebbe. The text itself is from the Tzemach Tzedek, his grandson, but he's quoting his grandfather, the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, of course, the leader of the Hasidic movement. And yet they both come to the same point. Shlomo, go ahead.
The primary reward in the hereafter is the soul returning to its source and uniting with God. Certainly, however, it is even greater when the soul connects with God here in this world through the study of Torah and the performance of mitzvahs. For that purpose, that is the purpose of creation.
Text 16.
And 16, when our master and teacher, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, would enter a state of spiritual ecstasy, he would be heard exclaiming, I want nothing at all. I don't want your paradise. I don't want your world to come. I want nothing but you alone.
In other words, we spend a lot of time in life thinking about this paradise. What is the result of my action? The result of your actions is now. The result of our actions is to actually learn to appreciate, and that's why Maimonides makes it one of the principles of the Torah, to actually learn to appreciate what our actions are, what our mitzvahs are. When we do a mitzvah, what are we doing? We're connecting with the divine, we're connecting with the infinite, and that itself, I recognize that we're physical human beings, and it's very difficult to appreciate that. But the more we learn about it, the more we do it, and the more we experience it, the more we learn to appreciate what it is for what it is, not for some kind of magical world that is going to be afterwards. We skipped the explanation about Kaddish here on the thing, but I wanted to get to our mission is to be divine operatives in this world.
Lesson 4.
And as we go through the summary of tonight's lesson, which we'll do in just a minute, hold on, let me reshare it with the sound, like that we hear the sound. I want you to take a minute to try exercise 4.4. Record a point in today's lesson that resonated with you most, and identify a good deed that you can do in memory of a deceased or loved one.
Lesson 4. Where we go. 1. God's rewards and punishments are natural consequences of our actions. 2. When we do mitzvot, we forge an intimate relationship with God. In the afterlife, our souls experience the effects of our actions, our relationship with God. This is the greatest possible pleasure, and is also known as paradise, Gan Eden. 3. At times, a soul cannot enter paradise immediately, for its inappropriate actions in this world diminished its capacity to experience spiritual pleasures. Gehinnom, a painful yet cleansing process, is temporary. Every soul ultimately reaches paradise. 4. In Gan Eden, the soul constantly ascends to higher levels. Good deeds performed in a person's memory, including the recital of Kaddish, elevate the soul to higher levels that it cannot attain on its own. 5. What we do here and now is more important than the pleasures or pain of the afterlife. Living in order to receive rewards in the next world, or to avoid heavenly punishment, distracts our focus from where it belongs, increasing goodness and godliness in this world.
Please join us next week for lesson 5, when we're going to throw a real monkey wrench into all the conversations we've had until today. Until today, we've been discussing the regular process, the soul's elevation to the next world, where it goes, etc. And next week, we're finally going to talk about reincarnation. I know a lot of you are curious about it. Please join us next week on Monday at 7:30 p.m. for lesson 5 of Journey of the Soul, Where We Go Again.
Great class, Sushi. Thanks a bunch.